we think about lions, right, and how they operate, right? There's what we call a territory or their domain, right? Similar, not the exact same thing. And let's say that male lion is the king of said domain, very Lion King sort of thing. And so if he's the king within his domain, that means he has dominion over, or has domination over the boundaries of that turf. And so within that space, what makes it his own are the pillars or principles he puts down. So it's like, anybody that enters my domain, there's an expectation of different behaviors, right? So maybe outside of my domain, these things are acceptable, but once you enter and cross that line,
right,
you either align with the principles or you will be kicked out. If each man's domain, because every man has one, whether he knows it or not, there are two places that it persists. In his presence, so when people are in my presence, there's a domain immediately. Both people have domains, and they're clashing, and it's a matter of, do we have cohesion or not? So if me and Lewis are hanging out, we both have our own domains, right? Our own territories in how we expect people to operate in our presence. And so if let's say Lewis doesn't like swearing and I swear all the time, one of us has to budge. I'll either stop swearing or you're going to stop being around me. Right. And so that's what I think people used to think of as framing, right? It's in my frame, but I like the distinction of the within versus the without. That would be a without example. So it's within my presence and within my property, right? So it might not necessarily be in my presence, but if you're in my house, I might not be there, but it's my property, and so that's a part of my domain or my territory as well. My principles extend to my property, right? And so that's how I thought about it in terms of women or whatever feminine. Let's use women in particular. The way I look at it is women have their own domain. It's not as pertinent to them, like it's not their core thing, but women have masculine, right? And so when they enter a man's domain or territory, they kind of feel it out and say, okay, what are the principles within here, right? And if he has none, then she'll just put him in her domain, and he submits in hers. And then at that point, he's her bitch, and she has no respect for him. But if she enters a domain where, like, oh, this guy's a king, okay, let me see, right? And she'll challenge your principles
to see.
Okay, let's see what he'll
where
do.
the holes and cracks
right.
are.
If you go, her presence is more important than my principles, meaning, because that's the only thing a woman is ever going to threaten a man with. You'll lose my presence, right? Because that's all we got. Like, what else is there? You can't physically harm in most cases, you know. So it's like, if you don't do this, my presence will disappear. And so at that moment, you're in a crossroads of, okay, there's my principles. Is it really that big a deal? Or do I lose the presence of this woman? And every time, without fail, you have to be like, okay, principles are principles. Because the moment you don't. Yeah, I got it. It's right.
It's a wedge and a crack,
and it never ends well.
Nope,
that will not end well. Because the moment she does that, it's like, my presence is way too important, and so now he's willing to submit to me. And if you're the one submitting,
he values me more than he values his domain,
more than his principles, his integrity. That's exactly what a principle is. You put that there because you function and operate best when those principles are in place. Not you just randomly put stuff up. So it's like, I'm willing to disrespect myself if it means keeping you. And you're no longer a man at that point. She knows that. You know it if you really wanted to reflect on it. But you're hoping, you know, in the short term she stayed. So, but eventually you realize it's not about whether she stays or not or anything of that nature. It's like, okay, who are you when you're by yourself? And if you continually submit just because it's fear, right? I'm afraid she'll leave. I'm afraid, you know. She continually submit to fear. You're living your life through fear, and she knows that. And all respect is gone, and she'll eventually leave. Because you're my bitch now, right? I know it, you know it. But a woman sees that your principles are beneficial, she'll submit. But she'll need to test it first to see if you're really about like, okay, you're the real deal. I'm attracted now. or if she already was, but now
But yeah,
they'll
I'm
say
committed
like
now.
that was turning me on. They don't
Right.
know why, but it's like, wow, you were willing to be a man and remain a man, even if that meant losing me. That's arousing because you're being masculine, which is actually what I want. Even though I say, well, if you don't do this, I'm gonna leave, and they never do, right?
Right.
So